Hi, this is Lee Hall. I'd like to talk a little bit about robbing other peoples, human and non-human, of the memory of themselves, of the story of themselves, of who they would have been without being interrupted by a domineering class. And I want to go back to Sinead O'Connor's song. My favorite song by Sinead O'Connor is Famine, and it's about the Irish potato famine, or so-called famine. As O'Connor explains, there was no crop failure. The famine was deliberately done. It was a starvation of the Irish people by the English. In the song, O'Connor says, quote, "An American Army regulation says you mustn't kill more than 10% of a nation, because to do so causes permanent psychological damage." O'Connor also says, during the supposed famine, we lost a lot more than 10% of our nation through deaths on land or on ships of emigration. And O'Connor concludes by explaining that what finally broke the Irish people was, quote, "not starvation, but its use in the controlling of our education." So Sinead O'Connor says that the most difficult and harmful part of the oppression by the English was that the Irish children were prevented from learning their own language, from passing on their own culture. Similarly, Randall Robinson, who founded Trans-Africa, says, quote, "The worst crime you can commit against a people is to rob them of the story of themselves." Now, I want to bring this into animal liberation as a way of learning. Human liberation movements and animal liberation are not the same. They're not comparable. They involve different oppressions, and the way we could unravel them involves different social mechanisms. But I do think that these messages from human rights activists, from human liberation activists, can inform animal liberation. You know, part of human supremacy, just as with white supremacy, is the idea that only we have culture, they cannot have culture. There was an article in Science magazine, printed in 2018, and the title is by Brett Jesmer and several other scientists. A number of scientists wrote it together, and the title is Ungulate Migration Culturally Transmitted? So ungulates are the hoofed animals, moose, sheep, deer, elk, so forth. And so the question is, asked in this scientific paper printed in Science, is their migration culturally transmitted? Very interesting question to ask. And they looked at the question by studying a group of both sheep, free-living rams, and also moose, who one group they would look at would have been translocated. So people would have deliberately moved these animals from one place to another, as sometimes happens. Sometimes people say, you know, it would protect a certain group of ungulates, say deer or elk, to be moved. So the scientists were looking at animals who had been moved, and they watched for many decades, and it turned out that translocated or moved populations, over time they did gain knowledge about, as the authors put it, surfing green waves of forage. And then they moved, then they migrated, as they learned how to surf new shoots that would come up seasonally. And the scientists said, our findings indicate that learning and cultural transmission are the primary mechanisms by which ungulate migrations evolve. very interesting to think that something we associate with instinct or biology or the turning of the seasons is connected indispensably with intergenerational teaching. And this is what happened with these populations. It's very sad to think that sheep not only have been moved by human beings or cleared out of the way for developments, but also they've been forcibly bred by humans since around 10,000, the year 10,000 BCE, before the current era. They were originally, their ancestors were called the Mouflon, and they evolved around the Caspian Sea, around Turkey and Iran. Today they are deemed threatened. And oftentimes we don't, in the vegan movement, we don't see or hear anything about them, anything about free-living sheep. They're massive animals with their massive horns. They're quite different to look at, to see. Than it's a big difference, what we have done to them, as we've selectively bred them to suit our purposes. But in let's say vegan literature, we often see pictures of sweet, cute, fluffy, white little lambs, and the question is, how could you eat this innocent lamb? And I get that. I mean, there seems to be this cruel indifference, right? You see a fluffy little animal and think, it's a baby. The word lamb is still with the, food item is still called lamb, so it shouldn't be that we don't know what we're doing. So, how could we be so mean-spirited, right? So I understand the message that is being conveyed with the picture of the cute little lamb. But my question will be, do we perceive the domination in the picture of the little lamb? Do we see what's wrong with that picture? When animals are purpose-bred to be, cute or amenable to our control, dependent on us, vulnerable, that should jar our senses. And instead we tend to think, cute little lamb. What about the evolution that they could have had we left them in their own population to evolve on their terms? Animal agribusiness robbed them of that, their evolution, their connected biological communities, and their very existence, as well, of course, as the story of themselves, who they would be without our complete control over them. I'm seeing that climate now is making this issue even worse. It's changing other animals to suit us or to live around us because they're simply trying so hard to deal with the loss of their habitats. And of course that robs them of their ability to evolve. We know that global heating does impact extinction risk, so we're already living in the midst of an extinction crisis, but climate crisis makes that worse. It impedes them from colonizing a new area so they can evolve naturally in extensions of their habitat the way they naturally would, and it impacts a changing species richness. So we look at dead zones, for example, right? We look at what our runoff of animal agribusiness and how it has created these areas where there's no oxygen around the seacoasts and deep into the ocean in some parts. And this is this problem because of the nutrients in our fertilizer and also because of the animal manure, animal waste that is constantly in this runoff is impacting, of course, the marine biocommunities. and they're trying to work around dead zones. So it might be the greatest diaspora of living communities that's ever existed on Earth. What's going on underneath the waters where we can't see. And then there are the birds who are trying to, for instance, migrate from one area to another. So they might be coming from South America, and they might, for example, the Hudsonian Godwit, that's a community of sandpipers, they come all the way up to nest at the Hudson Bay. And in their right before they come to lay their eggs, they fly 6,000 miles. That's their longest leg, 6,000 miles, without stopping. And then they finally get to the area where they're going to have their chicks, right? Their nesting areas. And the food that is normally there, that the small sandpipers go and find on the beach, is not there anymore because of climate crisis, because the climate zones are changing, and the insects on the beach they're gone. They're seasonally, it's too warm for them by the time the sandpipers arrive, so they're already gone. And so just thinking about everything that we are doing that is taking away the ability of other animal communities to experience their own story on this planet in their time, in their habitat, in their own ways, on their own terms. And I do believe that what we have robbed them of is very much like what colonizers do when they take land and when they don't let the oppressed group teach their language intergenerationally or show them how they would naturally move. And the same thing, of course, now is happening to the Palestinians at the hands of Israel. All these things are connected. And as complex as it may sound, but I think it's actually simple. We need to know about all of them in order to actually have an effective, meaningful, powerful movement for animal liberation.